Alright, so this video will cover discussions of adding baselines and regions to corridors, specifically looking at creating an intersection between two roadways. So here we've got this is a bridge project we're working on. We've got a basic corridor that runs the length of the replacement project. Again, we'll have issues around the bridge we'll discuss later, but right now we need to tie this in to the existing roadway. Because right now if you see the main assembly, which is just a divided road or crown road, and it's got a ditch running through it. So right now the ditch runs through the existing road. So we're going to need essentially a separate corridor to create to match the existing over here. This is something we could just kind of knock this out, manually draw it in, and be good. Or we can actually add this to our corridor. So this is based on, we've got our alignment profile. This is our basic assembly here. We've just got two 10-foot, I think 12-foot lanes. We have a 6-foot 3-to-1 slope, a 2-foot flat bottom ditch if we're in a cut scenario, 3-to-1 or a 3-to-1 fill. So that's our basic assembly. And we only have one alignment here. So there's two options when we want to add to a corridor. Say we want a center line for this roadway. We can do two separate things. We can either add a separate alignment with an associated profile, or we could just use a feature line. So there's benefits to doing one or the other, but I'm going to use a feature line. So one thing I actually need to do real quick that I forgot is with this corridor, for this all to work, we need to create corridor surfaces, which we can do very simply. We can add a corridor top, and we'll just turn the display off. We want to add a top link, add as a break line. We want to also add a datum real quick, and then we're going to have a datum link for that one. And then we'll just real quick add a boundary for those. Yes, okay. We'll actually turn the corridor on to rebuild automatically. Okay, so now we have our surfaces. That will help for our feature line. So I'm going to create a feature line, and here we can name it if we want. This is going to be, so we'll just call this Luther Road Center Line. Just make it a basic feature line. Not too worried about the layer right now. So I'm going to start it. I want to keep it within our topo. So the limits of the topo are about right here. So I'll come in about here. And we're going to specify, we'll specify the elevation. We can actually specify it from the surface and select the surface. And so it automatically puts it in there for us because it's pulling it from this surface. So now what I want to do is I want to shift right click, and I'm actually going to set it perpendicular here so we know we're coming in perpendicular to our alignment. And then again, I can either specify the grade or the elevation. So I want to specify the elevation, and again I want to get it from the surface. So I'm going to select surface, and this time I'm actually going to use the top of the corridor. So we can hit OK. And now we're good. So now we have our feature line. If we come to the elevation editor, drag this over. So this is our starting point here, and this is the actual elevation. Again, this one is referenced from our existing ground topo surface, whereas this one matches our alignment surface, or our corridor surface. Okay, so to add, basically what we want to do now is make this feature line a corridor. and we want to attach it to this one. So if we click on the corridor, we can add a baseline here. So the baseline can either be based on an alignment and a profile or a feature line. The main point is any baseline needs to have a horizontal geometry and a vertical geometry. Again, we can do that either through a alignment as our horizontal, profile as our vertical, or a feature line which features both of those. The main difference in doing the two, feature lines are great for linear tangents, but don't handle vertical curves, essentially. So if you need vertical curves, go with your alignment and profile. So there's our feature line. So okay, so now nothing really happened, but if we go look in our corridor properties now, we have another baseline here. So here's our main baseline, and you can see, or our first one, and you can see here's the horizontal and vertical associations there. So you could select different profiles here, whereas this one, here's our baseline information, okay? But there's nothing underneath it. Whereas here we have this. This is actually a region. So baselines are higher up in the hierarchy, and then below that are regions. And we can split our corridor into a bunch of different regions. Each one has their own assemblies, frequencies, targets, things like that. So right now we need a region. So we can either right click here, add region, or we can go back up here to our ribbon and we can add a region. Now, the region is based on a baseline. So because we're just adding a generic region, we need to select our baseline first. And here we want to establish that it's the full length of this feature line. So we could call that whatever we wanted, but we want to apply the assembly that we previously set. We're going to hit OK, and it pops up with our target surfaces. So for our daylight, we're going to just target our existing ground. We don't have anything width or slope right now. So now we have an assembly, a new section of our corridor. But if you'll note, this is all one thing now. Okay, they are connected together. All right, so if you notice, there's a little bit of a problem here. So we still have the problem we had earlier, right? We have a corridor that's still trying to run a ditch through here, and now we've got actually another problem. We have a corridor trying to run a ditch this way. All right, so we have attached these two and they are now linked, but what we're going to have to do is fix this intersection. Okay, and there's different ways to do that, but we just kind of need to first think about how we want to do that, what that's going to look like. So I'm going to turn the corridor off for a second and just think about our assembly and what it looks like. So we have lanes. We have 12-foot lanes, okay? So if we offset our alignment 12 feet here, we offset 12 and 12. Now, I want you to notice this. When we offset the alignment, it just created a polyline. When we offset a feature line, it creates feature lines, okay, which we may or may not want here. The main thing, and we can just draw a polyline quickly over there if we really want to avoid issues there. But let's just say, so that's the edge of our roadway, but now we want we basically want this to be a radius. So a normal typical radius is going to be 25 feet. So it would be nice to have this curve as 25 feet. So we can do that two ways. We could do a fillet, we could do a circle that's tangent to both these lines. So I think one thing, we're just going to trim these up and get rid of these. So one thing to note when you're doing this is all of these need to be ideally on the same elevation, or it generally won't work. So if we set all of these, and let's just say the elevation is 100, okay, that's not the final elevation we want, but if they're all the same, then we know they're on the same plane. So we could use fillet. Select the radius as 25. Click here. We could equally do a circle, TTR, tangent. So we click tangent, and specify the radius, which is 25. And then now we have to do trimming, but basically we're achieving the same purpose here, okay? Whereas this one now is a single polyline, and this one is multiple. Okay, so from here we have our geometry of how we want this to go, okay? So I'm actually going to get rid of these. And for this exercise, it's actually better to have an individual arc or polyline that we can use. So I'm actually going to go in here and find that tangent point and trim out these. Okay. So now this is actually a bent polyline. I want to make this arc a polyline as well. So I just hit P-edit, click it. I want to turn it into one. Yep. So now we have two polylines. And so now that's going to be our base geometry for our radius. But to do this, if we turn our corridor surface back on, or just our corridor, okay, we still have a problem here. We still have a lot of overlapping geometry. And so there's a couple tricks that we're going to need to deal with. So one thing is thinking about what is the overlapping area. Okay, so for one, it's basically the area between here and here, as far as east-west, and from here to here on the north-south. So I'm going to move this corridor down here, so we clear up this region. That's what we're going to be doing, is clearing up kind of the area that we want to work in. So that was easy. I could just simply drag that one. For this one, it's going to be a little more difficult, and I actually need to split this region. So I'm going to come in, split, and I want to split it for once here, and then also again right there. Oops, didn't do that. Okay, let's get that over here. So now I should have a corridor. This corridor, main part, should have three regions. And right now I'm just going to turn this one off. So now we can see we don't have anything going on there. This is what we want it to look like. Okay, but now we need to create actually a few new assemblies. Okay, so let's think about what we're going to be working with here and what assemblies we could do. So this north side has nothing to do with this intersection. So it needs to continue being just its regular self based on the assembly. Whereas here, we're going to need the daylights and everything outside of the lanes, but then the lane is going to have to snap to these two features while going around this feature. Okay, so when we go and think about assemblies, so turn this off, and so we'll open our views so we can kind of see this going on at once and think about it. So let's think. This is our main assembly. Okay, we copy that, and we mentioned for here we want to keep this left side or north side the same, but this is going to be messy. So what if we come in and we just delete the right side. Oops, not that one. Sorry, I grabbed the wrong marker. And we'll just call this typical, but there's no right. Okay, so, and what if we go back in our corridor properties? We'll turn this on, but now we're going to change the assembly to the typical, but no right side. You see, we've still maintained this corridor over here on the north side, which is the left as we look down the alignment. And so we've taken care of that. But now we need to fix the actual intersection part. And to do this, we almost still need just half of the roadway, right? We need this to follow this curve and come up in here. But the problem is which alignment do we set it to? Because there are multiple options. And if we just had this, we don't have a right or left side. So we're going to have to fix that. So the way we do this is we actually turn these polylines into feature lines. And again, we will add them as baselines and regions within our corridor. And then we're going to do that first, and then we'll also need to create a new assembly that will be based and will be allowed to do this. Okay, so what we can do is we can create feature lines. We want to create them from objects. Click here. Okay, so we'll name this intersection west. That doesn't really matter. We'll leave that just in case. And now we're going to assign elevations. Now, we can assign elevations from surfaces just like we did before. But now if we assign them from the top surface, okay, this is our corridor. We know that this is correct up to this point, and we know this one is correct up to this point. So if we assign elevations from the top surface and it snaps right here and right here, then we will have the proper elevations to map this route. Okay, and you can see now we have a beginning, we have an ending point here. Okay, and so we're going to do the same thing for our other side. So we'll create from objects. We're just going to call this one intersection east. Oops. Okay, we don't want to do that. We do want to assign elevations, again from the top. Okay. Alright, same thing here. Now this will come into play. Ooh. Now, this is why you always check. So if you look here, it didn't catch that bottom one. It's just a little bit off here. So if we drag that down, now it snaps to the actual top surface. So sometimes you got to double check to make sure they match exactly. Okay, so but what will come into play later is if we look, what is our stationing? 0. So last time 0 was here and the higher number was here. This time 0 is up here and the higher number is down here. So think about the direction that goes. This one goes and follows here, whereas this one goes backwards. So that will come into play in a little bit, and we'll discuss that. So now what we need to do is think about our assembly. So this is the general assembly we want. We want half of the roadway, we want the slope, and we want the daylight. The problem is the marker and where we have that. So we want to copy this. And now if we click on this, oops, we need to think about our assembly properties and the construction and where the main markers are. Here everything emanates from this point, right? So if we say we snap this as a baseline, the lane would go back into here, but we want the lane to go this way and the daylight and the slope to go this way. So we actually need to create a new assembly. And so we're just going to create an assembly, and we'll call this intersection. Okay. Now we're going to start here. Now what we can do is we can copy this part. So we can copy our daylight and side slope. Let's get that away. And we actually want to create and copy our lane as well, but we want it to go the other way. And let's see if we can just copy this directly here. So we need to switch the side that the lane goes on. Right? And it doesn't really matter. I like when I do the intersections to make the lane a little bit shorter so you can actually see how it works. Okay, so now it comes here. We technically want it as a positive slope since it's going that way. But again, that won't matter as much. Okay, but now this is the center point of our assembly. Okay, and again, let's make sure, okay, that's named intersection. So, like we did before, we are now going to add, one at a time, each of these intersection ramps, or just, our curves, as a baseline to our corridor. So we need to highlight the corridor. We're going to add a baseline. I'll call this one just intersection west. And now, again, we want to click feature line and then intersection west. Okay. So we need to add it as a region now. And you can see it highlights all the possible baselines. So we don't have a baseline set here. We still have that one. And now here we want to start it from here and go down here. So region name, do the same thing, intersection west. And we want to use the intersection assembly. Our daylight, we're still going to target. Our bridge, we're going to leave this blank for now just so we can show you the process. Okay. Now, that looks a little bit funky for a lot of reasons. First thing, we're going to edit the frequency, and we're going to turn that down. We'll just say to 5 feet for now. So when it goes around curves, it does weird things. So now you can see that it follows our curve pretty well. The problem is it looks like our lane goes this way and our daylight goes that way. So that's the issue I mentioned about the direction of our alignment, or in this case our feature line. So what we want to do is click our feature line, and up here there's a reverse button, and we can actually reverse the direction it goes, and now we can see this fits in there fine. Now it matches here. Now obviously there's a little bit potentially to deal with. There's actually a head wall coming in here, but just for a general representation, we've matched our ditch coming around the corner, and we've matched our slope, side slope. But right now, our lane only goes 2 feet around the corner. We want that lane to match our center line crown for both of these features. So now to do that, we're going to edit our targets for this region. And so now there are 2 things we want to edit. Or we just need to edit one thing actually. So we just need to edit the lane. But we do need to edit both the elevation and the width, because we want this, essentially this lane, to stretch both width-wise and to match the elevations here. So remember, the main alignment is an alignment and a profile, whereas this intersection road is just a feature line. But we need to target both. So First, we're going to target our width just to show. So we're going to target first the alignment that we set here, but we're also going to select our feature line here. And we're just going to hit OK. Now you can see this actually snapped to meet both of them. So our lane stretched to meet the center line for our alignment and the center line of our intersection, which is a feature line. But now it's only that width. It's not set to match these elevations. So we need to follow the same process. We set our width targets. Now we need to set our elevation targets. So our elevation is our surface. So that's our finished grade surface. But we also need to come over here, and this is for selecting feature lines and other features to target, and we need to select that feature line. And so it's going to do both. Okay, now you're not going to see a big difference here because we're only seeing it in 2D. But if we click on that and we view, and we move this around, now you can see this matches perfectly with our lane and our slope and our ditch coming around. Now anytime you look here, you always can notice maybe a crazy drop off at the end, and a lot of times that's because our corridor maybe goes just a hair too far, which is something we can take care of in general, and we'll do that separately. Just going to save that. So now we need to follow the exact same process for our other intersection. So we're going to click on our corridor, and we're going to add a baseline. This one will be intersection east. Again, we want to set this as a feature line side, and now intersection east. Okay, so now we need to add this as a region, and we're going to start from station 0, come down to the endpoint, call that intersection east, and again we're going to use our intersection assembly. Now, all that targeting that we did previously through the corridor properties parameters dialog box, which sometimes can be messy, and if you're used to an older AutoCAD or Civil3D, this is what you're used to seeing. This is easier to do from the initial setup. So we could go ahead and set all of this here. We can go ahead and set our width target for our lane and work it all through here. So we could set our width as feature lines or alignments. So we could set first the alignment, click it, add. Then we could go into feature lines and select from the drawing, select our center line. Okay, so now we've selected our width, and now we want our lane elevation target. Again, we'll go to profiles first. That's just our EG or FG surface. Now we're going to select again this feature line from the drawing. Okay. And now this basically all happens at once. Now what's the difference? The one thing we can't do in that dialog box is set the frequency. So we can come in and edit the frequency real quick. And I'll show you, just say if we turn it down even to 2, that it'll create even tighter. You can see how that works all the way around. Okay, and again, go to view this, and now we can see at least our intersection is matched up. Now we've got an issue here at the end, but we can deal with that later. The point of this video is just matching all of these up and creating this intersection. So again, to reiterate, for this this can be an alignment or a profile for this separate intersection, but all of this is through the corridor properties, through adding baselines, adding regions, and then manipulating the assemblies basically to get at this. So I will note one thing: if you're trying to add an assembly or something that isn't a standard feature. Sometimes we may not know what this shape is, and that's hard to assume, or we have to think a little bit harder about what this assembly needs to be, what the intersection, kind of that curb return area needs to be. And that can be the tricky part of doing this if you have non-standard geometries that you need to match up. So sometimes this may be easier to do just manually and bring these in, draw the feature lines, and just set all this up. But as far as roadway intersections, it's pretty straightforward. You have your typical section, your main assembly, and you just follow it along. Okay, so I think that's it for this video. Thanks.